Hey, how's it going?
Welcome to, I'm just going to turn you up a bit for me. Yeah. Oh,
Hopefully you
I'm
can
glad. It
hear me
doesn't,
okay today.
I can. Yeah, we did a little test call yesterday, Prano and I, and discovered that she needed the little microphone. And in fact, I had a call earlier today, about an hour ago, on another account that I host chats for. And for some reason, the sound was crazy. So I had to plug myself in. So I'm ready in case that
Thank God
happens. But
for
I'm assuming
small, tiny boxes of technology that can help us through.
And I'm assuming, guys, in the comments, if there are any sound issues, you will let me know. But at the moment, it sounds good to me. Sounds good to you?
Good. Yep.
Great. So, welcome to your curious conversation or our curious
Thanks.
conversation. Um, so, I describe you as a filmmaker because you are a director, a writer, an editor.
hmm
Would you say that's fair? Is there anything I'm missing?
No, I think that's I kind of find filmmaker an easier one to roll off the tongue than writer director sounds nice, but I think personally I started as a director before being a writer, and I've caught up as a writer, so I think I'm more comfortable saying I'm a director even though I am a writer. It's just one of the areas that I guess even though I've written a feature film that's being made, it's still an area that I feel is
Which let's just take a second to say, oh my God. I mean, that's not an easy thing. Write the
no,
feature, have the feature being made. That's an incredible,
no.
congratulations.
Thank you. I did co-write it, so I can't take all the writing credit
Still.
myself. But I think that's one of the things. It's like, I still feel like that's an area that my confidence is growing in, whereas I feel very confident as a director, which is funny because I think a lot of people have it the other way around.
Yeah, I would agree with that. From my experience as as an actor with the various people I've met, I would say you're right. It's people start writing. Why did you start writing from directing? What prompted that?
Um, I think it was, well, on the film that I'm making at the moment, which is my debut feature, actually, I was encouraged to take a more prominent role in the writing because the idea came from me originally, but I collaborate a lot with the same writer. And one of our sort of financiers that we were developing with said, why don't get more involved on the writing front? And I think it was great advice because I think I just needed a bit of a push. And I was always told I was good at writing, but it's just, I don't know. I think probably as well because I was directing so much, it was easier for me to make more work if I had a co-writer or a writer that wasn't me because writing takes a long time. So it's easier to
Yeah.
just be making things, particularly on in the short format, where you're hopefully making things a bit more frequently than in long form.
Yeah. And how was that as an experience of, I mean, you say that you worked with a writer quite a lot, but from the outside, being a director appears to be can be quite a lonely process because you're the one who's supposed to have all the answers, essentially. You know, if everything suddenly there's an unexpected rainstorm, you're supposed to kind of figure that out in a lot of ways. And how did you find then being involved in, well, having a collaborator right from the beginning
As a writer, you mean?
as a writer, then and director on the same project?
So I don't, I have co-directed, but once on a short film, but I don't co-direct now. So I think it's about finding the right people to work with because Anthony Fletcher, who I co-write with, I mean, I found him years ago. I was kind of trying to find a writer to work with, and I we got along really well, and I really liked what he'd already written. And I think it's about finding the right balance of personalities. I mean, I I'd say that I'm the more pushy one, and Anthony's the one that's most likely to go, well, you're directing it, so we've got to make sure you're happy, which is really lovely. And for me, that the he's he's incredibly collaborative. I'm not saying I'm not, and I'm not saying that I'm like a demon or a thing to work with. It's just that he's thoughtful, and we talk a lot about ideas, and it's a really he's very I guess he's got like an experimental side as well that I think works well with my tendencies. So I often try to look in collaborators for people who maybe aren't exactly the same as me, because that would be boring. So people who do think a little bit differently, so that you're seeing another perspective sometimes, or having
Yeah.
another way of looking at, like, another style of input, you know. I think that's
And it
quite
must be
helpful.
very important that you can communicate together because, for exactly that reason, somebody might come up with something that didn't fit an expectation or whatever. But collaborating does seem a lot of communication, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And he actually, funnily enough, lives in Uruguay, or mostly lives in Uruguay now. So all of our work is done remotely. So think about lockdown and how things are changing for everybody. But for Anthony and I, that's almost always been the case. And we probably work best when you can kind of be in your own environment and then just jump on Skype and talk through the ideas and then go back to the writing. But yeah, communication and being able to understand each other, I think, is at the like heart of collaboration, definitely. And I think that
Yeah.
comes with whether it's, you know, crew or cast, you know, that you're on the same page, that you're all working towards the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And what's do tell us what the latest project is that you've been working on together? This is your
Um,
feature.
yeah, so I'm kind of what was quite close to the end of post before lockdown, but we've been delayed because of this. But you know, it's not the worst thing in the world. It's like, yeah, it's okay. Um, so it's a psychological horror called Censor, and it's set in the early 80s, and it's about a film censor working during the sort of social hysteria surrounding video nasties, or VHS horror, at that point, when videos were said to be about to turn us all into murderers and rapists. You know, we're talking about things
Yeah.
like The Evil Dead and Texas Chainsaw Massacre and things like that. And it's about a film censor whose sister disappeared when she was a child. And one day at work, she sees something in a film that she's watching, that she's censoring or examining, that kind of harks back to her sister's disappearance, and it sets her off on a new journey to try and find her sister again as an adult.
Oh my God, that sounds amazing. I'm gripped already. I genuinely
Yes.
am. When is the, obviously with all the delays, when is it expected? What's the new kind of release date?
So we don't have a release date because it's an independent film, so we would be going out to film festivals hopefully next year, and then hopefully we'd have a release date. Kind of, it's hard to tell with film festivals. I see some films going to festivals and then they are released quite quickly, and others have a longer festival life. So but it's been a really exciting journey making it so far, and we've worked with Film 4 and the BFI and Film Cymru Wales, so really great partners, and then a brilliant cast. So Neve Alga, who was in The Virtues, plays the lead. Who
Oh
is
wow, yeah, she's amazing.
incredible. Yeah, she is. She's incredible. So it's been great. It's been an amazing experience. I mean, it's exhausting, which is probably why the beginning of lockdown for me was like, oh, this is kind of like I kept having a little rest. But after you've had a little rest, you're like, okay, can we carry on now? But yeah,
Yeah.
it's I don't think anyone can quite prepare you for how exhausting directing a feature film. Like, I'd been told and I knew, and I was in my head, like I was ready, I was prepared, but the reality is yeah, it's quite intense.
How long was the shoot?
The shoot was 5 weeks.
Okay. Wow.
So you're in prep for five. I think we were in prep for 5 weeks beforehand, and then the shoot was 5 weeks.
That's pretty intense for a feature.
Yeah, it's a good amount for a feature, but it's all relative, I think. I mean, if you're, it's tricky now with shoot lengths because it's kind of a one size fits all in lots of ways. So rather than looking at what you actually need in terms of time based on what you're trying to achieve, I think it's more like, oh, it's a first feature at this budget, 5 weeks, or oh,
Yeah,
it's a
that's what
first
you
feature
get.
at this budget, 2 weeks.
Yeah,
And actually maybe you're doing something quite complicated where you've got lots of location moves or lots of casts, so it's naturally going to take longer. So it's interesting, and I wonder if the kind of COVID guidelines and the things that were coming out of this period in terms of the film industry, if that's going to make people look more specifically at what's being shot and more carefully and plan. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see if that happens. It's obviously
yeah.
slightly
It's definitely
unknown
going to
there.
change things, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's by necessity.
yeah.
It's definitely going to be an interesting yeah, development. There'll be maybe its own genre of like post-COVID films or
Yeah, when no
yeah.
one holds hands or kisses.
Yeah. Yeah. Everyone's at a distance. Yeah, for
Mm.
sure. And obviously, many people I'm sure will know, but you are you're known for horror. Like that is what you a lot of your the subject or the genre, I guess, that you explore. What is it
Mm.
about horror that really interests you or inspires you?
It's a question I often ask myself. Like, it's
It's
funny
quite a
because
broad term, horror.
yeah, it is, but I think I've always questioned why I love horror, not in a negative way, but just as a curious thing. Like, what is it that draws me to this? I think I'm probably interested in the darker ways of, the human mind working, and why people do bad things, I think, is something that I often find myself thinking about. Like, what's the reason behind people doing horrific things or doing immoral things? Which is maybe the more sort of serious side to the work. But then on a less serious side, like the aesthetic of horror can be so vibrant and exciting. And I think in terms of a world within the horror world, obviously you have to create rules for each story, but anything's possible. We're not like grounded by the same rules as reality. You're kind of looking at things that could be supernatural, that could be body horror, that you can use horror as a metaphor for something that's much bigger going on in society, like things like Get Out, or sort of more emotionally driven horrors like The Babadook. So I think looking at horror as a kind of metaphor for the things that we repress or the things that we can't face in our life, I find really fascinating, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, and we certainly seem to be living in a time where you've got to wonder what the creative content's going to be coming out of it. What are the stories and what are the metaphors that are going to be used to have these incredibly important conversations to bridge some
Yeah.
serious divides.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting because some people I think have been wanting to lean more towards lighter stuff during this period.
Mhm.
I don't feel like I have. I had one day where I've watched like four really horrific films in a row, and I was like, what am I doing to myself? But I wonder what's going to be being kind of commissioned, and what, it's going to be led, I think, by that. And there's so much going on politically at the moment as well, which I hope will be a part of what comes out of this time in terms of what's getting made.
Yeah, the storytelling. That's definitely a very positive and genuine, like a truthful way to look at it, that out of all adversity, generally some really amazing creativity comes out of it,
Yeah, yeah.
out of
I think
necessity, I
that
think.
I think that one of the things that we've realized maybe in lockdown is how important stories. Well, one of the things I've thought about is how important stories are, and you could think about that on like the stories that, you know, when you're shut in your house and you're only receiving news from the outside world, and what are the stories coming in, there's that aspect. There's obviously the aspect of like the stories that have kept us entertained and sane that we're watching on television, and then there's the stories of our friends and what's going on for one another. And at one point, me and my housemate were like, we've had no gossip. We need some gossip. We're just us in this house that we need, you know, like no one's like been out and had a wild night, and you know, there's like
Yeah.
kind of day to day, you know, not so important stories that we've been kind of missing as well. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that feed us in a lot of ways, don't they? Those little
yeah,
bits that you can digest and feed on for a day or
yeah.
whatever. Yeah. And I was going to ask that, like, you kind of touched on it, but how do you feel like lockdown has affected your creativity, like, or impacted, maybe is a better way of putting it?
Um, I think it's changed over time. So at first, like I say, I was actually to have a break, to have a rest was really appreciated and needed because I was quite exhausted from making the feature. So I was like, oh wow, just stop. And I think stopping sometimes can be the best way to replenish yourself so that you can kind of continue. And then there came a moment where I was like, wow, I've got the opportunity to think of new ideas now. I've got some time. So I started to burrow into some new projects, and that was going really well. And then there was a point where it just all went, like, it just stopped. And I was like, you know, the creativity came to a roadblock, and I kind of was like, maybe this is because I put too much pressure on myself. Maybe I'm not getting enough coming in. Like, you know, maybe I'm
Yeah.
overthinking. And I think I've kind of passed through that period, and I'm back to being excited about ideas again. So it's really, you know, there've been weeks where it's been harder, I think, and I think also one of the things in terms of that, the week times where it's been harder, and I think lots of people have probably felt this, is there's again so much going on outside and in the news, and it's hard to not get completely consumed by that. And whether that's like related to coronavirus or Black Lives Matter, or you know, other things that are going on that you kind of feel like you need to be observing or being part of and aware of, and
Yeah.
somehow your own work can feel a bit unimportant all of a sudden because of everything else. So it's kind of, there's been moments like that where I've had to kind of allow that to happen, and allow whatever, you know, I need to do at that point to happen. And then usually it comes back to finding time where I feel kind of creative again.
Yeah, I would definitely agree from my own point of view and some of the conversations I've had that whatever I think your creative output, I think at the start of lockdown, many people were frozen and kind of felt that, well, you know, this is kind of life and death stuff, and what place does what I do have in that? And then Black Lives Matter, everyone sort of, you know, found a space and found a way, and then yeah, Black Lives Matter definitely. After Blackout Tuesday, I myself and many people I know had sort of real, I don't know how to come back in. I don't know. I don't want to come back into the same space and take the
Yeah.
same space, but I don't know how to make space for, you know, how to, yeah. It's
Yeah.
been a really interesting period of time.
It has. It has, and it's fascinating, isn't it? Because I read somewhere that said, isn't this an incredible time where we could all be, the whole world stopped, and it's almost like everybody in the whole world for a moment was doing the same thing, was like just sitting, stopping, and almost like a kind of global meditation. And you wonder if you know, coming out of that, we can make all the positive changes, or as many positive changes as possible, to create something different to come out of. I don't know, to see what can be possible out of this period, rather than, I mean, there's lots of things that are uncertain, and lots of people that are worried, obviously, about
Hmm.
business and health, and lots of things like that, yeah, but are there other things that are the ways that we can change our consciousness slightly and change our ways of thinking to come out of this with, an opportunity to, like, for example, in the film industry, which, is definitely needs to look at equality in so many areas, and various other issues, like how do we come out of this and be putting into place like practices that are going to support that, basically.
Yeah.
I hope that these things will actually come to fruition in some way. And I think all of
I
us
think,
stopping and thinking like, what's my part in that is really,
yeah,
really good.
I think that can only be a good thing. I was listening to a podcast where they were talking with some already, pre-existing prominent Black Lives Matter activists and asking, why do you think this time is different, for example, and talking with psychologists as well, and they had many reasons, but overwhelmingly it felt like because of lockdown, because there isn't the distractions, the daily distractions, there is this forced point of reflection, whatever your point of view is. You're kind of, you can't ignore it. Like, it's I think that I believe that there'll be lots of positivity that comes out of it, and I also believe that this is a period of history, and creativity is a huge part of that, in documenting it and in communicating it and helping everyone kind of process it in a way.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And have you been watching, we've got to ask, of course, as a horror film director, before I forget this, but we've got to firstly ask what your top horror films would be to recommend to us, lockdown or not.
So some you may have seen. The Shining is probably one of my favorite films, and definitely I think favorite horror film. I used to watch it about once a week in my early 20s. So definitely The Shining.
Once a week?
Yeah, I was caught once reading the book and watching the film at the same time. It's like, how did Stanley Kubrick adapt this? I must find out.
I love that.
But it's just such a brilliant film. I know that Stephen King disagrees with me, but and Let's Scare Jessica to Death is another one which probably is less known. People may not have heard of that. It's a 70s psychological horror about a woman doubting her own mind. And it's just wonderful. It's quite dated. It's got like a slightly dated voiceover, but the central performance is just amazing. It's one of those films that, like, I love it so much. I want everybody to know about it. And you'd think, well, maybe you could remake it, but you just wouldn't want to touch it because, it's like, I'm not a huge fan of remakes anyway, but it's fantastic. Very spooky and haunting, and really kind of captures a paranoia and a self-doubt, really. And I'm a huge Lynch fan, so I love Lost Highway is a brilliant Lynch film that I would say is a horror. And Blue Velvet is probably one of my favourite films, but I don't know if everyone classifies it as a horror film, even though it's got one of the most terrifying villains of all time in it.
So is that why you would class it as a horror film?
I think it's a horror film. I think it has elements of horror because it's about the repression of your dark side, or the exploration. In my opinion, it's about the exploration of our dark side, the underbelly of society, or the dark impulses that we might have. And it kind of explores that through this very kind of squeaky clean neighborhood boy in this kind of perfect American dream kind of world, that he kind of goes into the underbelly of the society and into the kind of dark, seedy world of some of these other characters. And I think it sort of explores the dark and light in ourselves and the dark and light in society. And in that sense, I think it's exploring elements of horror. But I guess probably most people would call it a thriller.
Okay. Well, they all sound very. I'm definitely interested in Let's Scare Jessica to Death. Anyone who is in here, do stick in your favorite horror movie, and I can put it to Prana, and she can tell you whether she agrees or not. And have you been watching like the general stuff that you've been watching in lockdown? Is horror like a big thing that you will consume as well as, quite regularly?
Yeah. I've been watching a lot of horror. I'm actually starting to work on something that's set in the 17th century. So I've been watching a lot of films set in the 17th century. And I've watched lots of like comedy as well. I mean, sometimes you just need a little bit of something light.
Yeah.
And quite a bit of TV. I'm loving I May Destroy You. I don't know if you've seen it. It's on BBC iPlayer, which maybe you don't get in Amsterdam.
We do get BBC, so yeah, and I can look that up for sure.
Watch it. It's fantastic. So yeah, I May Destroy You, which is Michaela Cole's new series. Yeah, it's really good. So yeah,
and when we spoke the other day, you were saying that you've been reading. You've been trying to read quite a bit.
Yeah, I was reading something for work, but I have been trying to read a bit more. I actually started reading The Second Sex the other day, which I haven't read yet, which is feminist literature.
Okay.
Which I read.
Oh, yes, I've heard of that. Yes.
I read a chapter to my boyfriend, which was it was really nice. We lay in the park and I read him feminist literature under a tree.
The dream.
As you do.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've been reading a bit more. I tend to I start books. I don't always finish them, but I'm trying to finish them.
To pursue it, yeah. And I was thinking, going back over your interview, which is on the Wool and Water blog, which was in 2017. God, how time flies. Obviously, on that interview, you were photographed wearing pair of braces. I'm wearing some today, and we talked about your style and how you express yourself, and it made me think about how you feel the role of like costume and wardrobe work in film. Like, how important are they to you in terms of communicating a character?
It's so important, and I think any actor would absolutely say that. I mean, the film Censor, my feature that I'm working on at the moment, is set in the 80s. So you have one level where costume and hair and makeup is such a huge factor in terms of the world of the film. We're looking at 1980s Britain. So it's setting that era. It's setting what kind of era are we talking about? Like, even within the era, there's like different genres of 80s. Like, is it all kind of cassette tapes and, Ferris Bueller sort of, although that was a bit later, but, is it kind of more pop, or are we looking at slightly more punky 80s, or is it like what I was going for is maybe just sort of more grey, bleak 80s every day, like trying to actually capture, what it was like day to day on the street. And so, in that sense, you're creating a world partly through costume. But then when it comes to character, it's so important, because you're talking about, it could be even something like a neckline, that a neckline might just, you can use it emotionally, like that one day is that person wearing something quite tight around their neck, and then they're maybe a bit looser the next day because they've had a wild night the night before and they're wearing something a bit more off the shoulder. So you can really kind of you can tell so much story through costume. And I think for an actor, it makes an actor feel a different way. So I almost think that you can be a method costume designer, where you're looking at the character from the inside out through costume. I remember hearing one designer who said they put things in the pockets of actors' costumes, even if they're not a prop that's going to be seen, or like if they open their wallet, they'll put like a picture of that character's family in the wallet, even if it's not going to be seen by the camera, because it just brings that person to life for the actor. You're trying to make it real for the actor as much as possible. So all those little details, I think, allow the actor to sort of sit into the character. So it kind of goes both ways. It's either making it more truthful for the actor, making them feel like another person that, has a different style, that wears trousers a bit tighter than they normally do or whatever, or it's what you're communicating to the audience about that character or about that world.
Yeah, I love that how you said about how you use it as well to communicate their shifting moods and emotions.
Yeah.
From how they're. And do you think that you have the same relationship yourself with clothes, with style? Do you use your clothes to communicate emotion?
I don't know if I do it consciously. I think it probably happens naturally. I think about what I've been wearing in lockdown. I've definitely become more comfy,
Yeah.
I think, perhaps when you're trying to look smart, it makes you feel a certain way. You dress a certain way, it makes you hold yourself differently. So if you want to feel more powerful going into an interview or a room where you need to hold some kind of authority, then I think you would wear, certain things to make you feel that way. That can be quite helpful in that sense. Whereas if I went
as a female filmmaker, maybe I'm making an assumption here, but I would say that sometimes, making that space at the table might be harder than maybe many male filmmakers. And correct me if you think I'm wrong, but
No.
I wonder how much you use clothing to do that as a kind of, I don't know, an armor or a kind of, to just communicate things either for yourself or for the various meetings you have professionally.
So when I went to my first meeting with the BFI about my feature film, I wore my Catherine Bigelow t-shirt, which there's like a company called Girls on Tops Tees, and they make t-shirts with different filmmakers and women in film on them.
Yeah, I have the Greta Gerwig one.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I've got quite a few of them, but I specifically chose Catherine Bigelow because she is such a, one, she works in genre, and I was going in to pitch my psychological horror film, and two, she's the only female director who's won an Oscar for directing. I just felt like it was a good thing to kind of put out, like, to the audience. I don't know if they were inspired in any way by my t-shirt to fund me, but they did fund me. But I think I'd always try and make myself feel smart and feel good about myself in order to, go through those meetings. I don't know, you kind of have this image of like some of a male director as being like overgrown hair and a beard and like an old crappy t-shirt, and I'm sure without the beard I probably look like that at times on set. But when I'm trying to, pitch my films, I, want to look nice and powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And before I let you get on with your day, it would be lovely to revisit some of the questions that I put to you in that original interview, which was what's inspiring you right now?
God, that's what's inspiring me right now. I think human behavior always inspires me. So I would say my answer is probably not that different to maybe what I said originally, but I think right now human behavior is, I don't know if this is exactly inspiring me, but it's something that I'm thinking about a lot, the way that we're judging one another right now, the way that we create rules for ourselves, and if somebody else doesn't do it the same way as us, then they're a bad person. And I think we're seeing a lot of that at the moment, and that can be whether somebody's wearing a face mask or somebody's going out more than other people, and all of these things that I think we're kind of observing in human behavior at the moment that all come back to our judgment of other people and what we think is good and bad, which is definitely something that I'm always looking at in my work, because good and evil is such a kind of inherent like thing in film, isn't it? Like, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy? And I don't ever think it's as black and white as that. I think that that's not something I'm interested in portraying. I'm really interested in characters who don't do the thing that's good all the time, and looking at why they don't do that thing and whether that means that they are a bad person, or if there's a way we can understand one another a little bit better, so that maybe we can be kinder, I guess, to each other, even though if most of my films don't end with like people being kind to each other, they've ended with gruesome violence a lot of the time. But at the heart of what I'm exploring, sort of kind of going against my own theory there, but at the heart of it is my interest, I guess, in how we judge one another's morals, or how we decide someone's not important or valid because they think in a different way to us, or they're doing something that we disagree with. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It seems to me, with all the conversations that are happening, that's going to be the only way forward, is to stop looking at what the differences are, and start having more empathy, rather than continually shaming.
Yeah.
It's not really getting anyone any further.
No, exactly. Yeah. It is. It's kind of why I was interested in censorship in lots of ways, because even looking at, I don't know, it's like, even for me, looking at horror films, I didn't think I remember thinking at one point, oh, like I don't agree with censorship at all. And then I saw a film that's called a Serbian film, and it's really, really violent, and it's got lots of incredibly horrible ideas in it. And I was like, okay, that's crossed the line. Nobody should see that. And I thought, well, if I think that about this film, maybe other people think that about films that I think are okay. It's kind of,
Yeah.
We've all got a line of where we think, whatever the subject is, whether it's horror or whether it's what we should or shouldn't be doing in relation to coronavirus, that there's a line and this is how we all think people should behave. But not everybody agrees, on that line. And I suppose I find that quite interesting, and I find the people's reactions to one another quite interesting in terms of if somebody else has crossed the line, how they're being judged, and what does that say about the person who's judging. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. There's a lot to dig into there, and a lot to explore.
Yeah.
And I assume it's sort of a similar answer to the question about what you're curious about. But maybe there's something else that an entirely different thing that you're finding that you're curious about right now.
I think I'm still curious about fear and how we react to fear, which is kind of what I think I spoke about in the original interview.
Yeah.
Like, why do some people really love being scared and other people don't? And what is it? Like, I think I used my sister and I as an example. My sister
Yeah.
she can't watch horror. Like, we've been to the cinema, and when something scary happens, she's actually like run in her seat, like her legs are going, she's running her seat, and she doesn't want to watch it. She likes crime thrillers though, and whereas I love horror so much that I've made that like my career. So it's just interesting because we're so similar in so many other ways. It's just I think, why do some of us enjoy being scared in a sort of safe environment and some of us can't handle it? And so I'm curious about that. I think there's been other like curiosities in my life through lockdown, where I've become like really curious about tomato plants. I'm like, wow, they're so like, it's just gonna make like everybody's just gonna be like, right, bye. Tuning out now, but like they're like, I wonder if they actually think, because they're just so responsive. Like they get really, really droopy and sad when when they're thirsty, and then as soon as you water them, they're like, and they like lean towards the light so fast. So, but I think that's basically more about like my current solar system and how small that's become. That tomato plants are something that I've become so curious about.
Isn't that awesome that you've been given the time to notice
Yeah, exactly.
and then get curious?
Absolutely. I know. And how much time I've had to like really get to know my plants is, I mean, it's really lovely in so many ways. It's really nice. And you're right. Yeah, it's great.
And so, do you feel, to sort of round up revisiting the questions, do you feel that this period of time, do you feel like it's going to have a direct impact on your creativity, or maybe it already has?
I think it has already because and I've had the time to stop and think about what I want to do, what I want to put my energy into. But I think also some of the things that have been going on globally I think they make us stop and look at what we're spending our time on in a new and different way. So, you know, what are we putting our energy into, basically? Like, is this project that you're not like, not that I've necessarily got, but just an example, like, is this project that you're not completely sure about, is that worth spending a big chunk of your life working on, or do you want to what do you really want to be putting your time towards? I think a lot of people, hopefully writers, have found an opportunity to kind of think about the project they really, really want to be working on, that they really want to be writing, because there's been this space, it's the rat race has slowed down a little bit, and it's not just like, oh, now we're looking for, programs about couples who fall in love, and now we're looking for this, and now we're looking for that, which I think means that often what we're seeing on TV and in the cinema can be similar stuff being churned out because commissioners maybe are looking for a specific type of thing. I hope now there'll be like a new range of things that are being explored because writers maybe have had time to work on their passion project and get that up to a certain point. I hope those passion projects will be kind of embraced by commissioners, and that we'll be seeing new, different, more varied things on
Yeah,
screen
absolutely.
off the back of it.
Yeah. I've just seen that there's a message here. Somebody else, Viva la tomato plants. I'm also growing them.
You should have a tomato plant gang.
So before I let you go, my very last question, I'm just going to keep an eye, because Instagram cuts us off after an hour as well.
Oh, right, okay.
But a new kind of last sort of question, I guess, for me, for these curious conversations is, the conversations for me are about the joy of conversation, about the connection and the journeys that you can go on with a conversation. But it's connected to wool and water because sometimes some of us need a bit of something to give us the confidence to go into that conversation or into that room or whatever. You go into a lot of rooms professionally and possibly aren't in a lot of rooms with a lot of other female contemporaries or peers by nature of being a director anyway. What would be your sort of top tip of what is it that helps you gear yourself up for confidence to walk into a room, whether that's a wedding or whether that's a professional environment or whatever it may be?
That's a very good question. I think hopefully, I mean, connecting with other people is something I really enjoy. I know lots of people, if you're talking about, for example, networking, loads of people really don't like it. But if you can try and look forward to connecting with people, to showing an interest in other people as well, I've always found that's a really good way to kind of find your way into situations that, especially sometimes we're not feeling at our best, and might not have had a great day or anything, and you've got to go into this scenario. And I think being curious about other people, you know, remembering that those people might not be feeling completely comfortable as well, and that you can find a connection between you to, like, there's so many great friends and people I've met through these kind of like events and things like that, that, yeah, I think it's just about remembering that everybody else is human, and that hopefully you'll find somebody who you like in there. I don't know
Yeah.
if that's very good advice or not. It's
No, I think that that's great. It's certainly something that I definitely do. I sort of shift my focus onto, you know, other people. Yeah, no, I think that that's terrific advice, and I did spot a few little hearts going up there, so that obviously resonated with a few people as well.
yeah.
Well,
I
thank you
think we
so
should,
much for.
yeah. No.
I was just going to say thank you so much for joining me for my third conversation. It was brilliant, and I can't believe it's been 3 years since your interview, but this has been awesome and so
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, it's been
And
really
thank you as well
lovely.
for the horror film tips, and yeah, loads of food for thought. So yeah, thank you so much.
It's a
And
pleasure.
I hope
Thanks
that
for having
people,
me.
oh, well, it's been an absolute treat. I hope that people will add to their comments to their favourite horror films, so that we can, maybe that's going to be tomorrow's big question on my grid. I always ask a question to start a conversation, so maybe it'll be
Yeah,
along that way, and you can let us know what you think of people's
I'd love to.
suggestions.
Maybe there'll be some in there that I don't know, and I should check out myself.
Yeah,
Yeah,
awesome. Well,
cool.
thank you so
Thanks.
much, and have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, you too. Thanks so much for having me. It's been really nice to have a
It's
conversation.
been lovely. Yeah, thank you. Right, bye
Bye.
bye.
Bye, everyone.